The stench hit Captain Sarah Chen before she even stepped off the transport shuttle. Dead flesh, sulfur, and something else. Something ancient and terrible that made her stomach turn. Around her, the other members of the Galactic Salvage Corps were already pulling on their breathing masks and activating their environmental suits. "By the 7 moons," muttered Crix, the Zolothian team leader, his forearms gesturing wildly at the massive form sprawled across the asteroid's surface. "Look at the size of that thing." The dragon's corpse stretched nearly 2 kilometers across the rocky surface, its once magnificent scales now dull and blackened with decay. Ancient wounds gaped along its flanks, and the smell of rotting meat was overwhelming even through their filtered air systems. Most of the salvage team immediately began calculating the value of dragon bone, scales, and organs on the black market. Sarah found herself walking closer to the creature's head, something drawing her forward against all logic. The other species in the galaxy had encountered dragons before, ancient, intelligent beings that ruled star systems and hoarded wealth beyond imagination. But they had all been wiped out in the Great Purge 3 centuries ago, hunted to extinction by a coalition of younger species who feared their power. "Chen, get back here," called Crix. "We need to start sectioning the corpse for transport. Dragon materials are worth more than this entire operation." But Sarah wasn't listening. As she approached the massive head, something caught her eye. There, nestled against the dragon's chest, partially hidden by a fold of decaying wing, was movement. Her heart stopped as she realized what she was seeing. A tiny dragon no bigger than a house cat was curled against its mother's chest. The hatchling's scale shimmered with an iridescent blue-green that seemed to pulse with its rapid breathing. Its eyes were closed, and it was making soft, mewing sounds that were barely audible over the wind across the asteroid. "There's a survivor," Sarah called out, her voice cracking with emotion. The salvage team gathered around her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hunger. For most species in the galaxy, a living dragon, even a baby, represented either an enormous threat or an enormous opportunity. "Kill it quickly," said Vorthak, the Brutanian weapons specialist. "Dragon young grow fast and become dangerous within cycles. Better to end it now before it becomes a problem." "Are you insane?" hissed Talara, the Sindarian merchant. "A live dragon hatchling could be worth more than 100 dead adults. The research possibilities alone, or we could sell it to the highest bidder." Sarah found herself stepping between the hatchling and her team members, a protective instinct she didn't fully understand washing over her. "We're not killing it, and we're not selling it." "Chen, be reasonable," Crix said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when dealing with what he considered human irrationality. "You're thinking with emotion instead of logic. That creature will grow up to be a monster. Every species in the galaxy knows what dragons are capable of." But as Sarah looked down at the tiny, helpless creature, she didn't see a future monster. She saw something that reminded her of the baby birds that used to fall from nests near her childhood home on Earth. Something that needed protection, care, and love. The hatchling's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep purple irises that seemed far too intelligent for such a young creature. When its gaze met Sarah's, she felt something shift in her chest, a connection she couldn't explain or rationalize. "The mother protected it even in death," Sarah said softly, noting how the dragon's massive claws were curved around the space where the hatchling lay, creating a small shelter from the elements. "She died keeping her baby safe. Dragons are parasites," Vorthak growled. "They consume entire worlds, enslave populations, and care for nothing but their own power. This one will be no different." Sarah knelt down slowly, extending her hand toward the hatchling. The tiny dragon raised its head, sniffing cautiously at her fingers. When she didn't move aggressively, it took a tentative step forward, then another, until it was close enough to touch. The moment her skin made contact with the hatchling's scales, Sarah felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. The baby dragon made a soft trilling sound and pressed against her palm, seeking warmth and comfort. The mother's been dead for at least a week, Sarah realized, looking at the advanced state of decay. This little one has been here alone, probably starving, trying to wake up someone who will never wake up again. She carefully scooped the hatchling up, surprised by how light it was. The creature immediately curled against her chest, its tiny claws gripping her uniform as it sought security. "Chen, put that thing down," Crix ordered. "We have a job to do, and harboring a live dragon violates about 17 different galactic treaties." "Then we don't report it," Sarah said firmly. We finish the salvage operation and I take responsibility for the hatchling. The team exchanged glances, clearly unhappy with her decision but unwilling to directly challenge a human's judgment. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for being unpredictable, stubborn, and surprisingly effective when they set their minds to something. As the other team members began their grisly work of harvesting materials from the dragon's corpse, Sarah walked back toward the shuttle, the hatchling secure in her arms. She could feel its tiny heart beating rapidly against her chest, and she made a silent promise to the dead mother whose protective claws still curved around empty space. Whatever the galaxy thought dragons were supposed to be, this little one would have a chance to be something different, something better. She just had to keep it alive long enough to find out what that might be. The stench hit Captain Sarah Chen before she even stepped off the transport shuttle. Dead flesh, sulfur, and something else. Something ancient and terrible that made her stomach turn. Around her, the other members of the Galactic Salvage Corps were already pulling on their breathing masks and activating their environmental suits. "By the 7 moons," muttered Crix, the Zolothian team leader, his forearms gesturing wildly at the massive form sprawled across the asteroid's surface. "Look at the size of that thing." The dragon's corpse stretched nearly 2 kilometers across the rocky surface, its once magnificent scales now dull and blackened with decay. Ancient wounds gaped along its flanks, and the smell of rotting meat was overwhelming even through their filtered air systems. Most of the salvage team immediately began calculating the value of dragon bone, scales, and organs on the black market. Sarah found herself walking closer to the creature's head, something drawing her forward against all logic. The other species in the galaxy had encountered dragons before, ancient, intelligent beings that ruled star systems and hoarded wealth beyond imagination. But they had all been wiped out in the Great Purge 3 centuries ago, hunted to extinction by a coalition of younger species who feared their power. "Chen, get back here," called Crix. "We need to start sectioning the corpse for transport. Dragon materials are worth more than this entire operation." But Sarah wasn't listening. As she approached the massive head, something caught her eye. There, nestled against the dragon's chest, partially hidden by a fold of decaying wing, was movement. Her heart stopped as she realized what she was seeing. A tiny dragon no bigger than a house cat was curled against its mother's chest. The hatchling's scale shimmered with an iridescent blue-green that seemed to pulse with its rapid breathing. Its eyes were closed and it was making soft, mewing sounds that were barely audible over the wind across the asteroid. "There's a survivor," Sarah called out, her voice cracking with emotion. The salvage team gathered around her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hunger. For most species in the galaxy, a living dragon, even a baby, represented either an enormous threat or an enormous opportunity. "Kill it quickly," said Vorthak, the Brutanian weapons specialist. "Dragon young grow fast and become dangerous within cycles. Better to end it now before it becomes a problem." "Are you insane?" hissed Talara, the Sindarian merchant. "A live dragon hatchling could be worth more than 100 dead adults. The research possibilities alone, or we could sell it to the highest bidder." Sarah found herself stepping between the hatchling and her team members, a protective instinct she didn't fully understand washing over her. "We're not killing it and we're not selling it." "Chen, be reasonable," Crix said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used when dealing with what he considered human irrationality. "You're thinking with emotion instead of logic. That creature will grow up to be a monster. Every species in the galaxy knows what dragons are capable of." But as Sarah looked down at the tiny, helpless creature, she didn't see a future monster. She saw something that reminded her of the baby birds that used to fall from nests near her childhood home on Earth. Something that needed protection, care, and love. The hatchling's eyes fluttered open, revealing deep purple irises that seemed far too intelligent for such a young creature. When its gaze met Sarah's, she felt something shift in her chest, a connection she couldn't explain or rationalize. "The mother protected it even in death," Sarah said softly, noting how the dragon's massive claws were curved around the space where the hatchling lay, creating a small shelter from the elements. "She died keeping her baby safe." "Dragons are parasites," Vorthak growled. "They consume entire worlds, enslave populations, and care for nothing but their own power. This one will be no different." Sarah knelt down slowly, extending her hand toward the hatchling. The tiny dragon raised its head, sniffing cautiously at her fingers. When she didn't move aggressively, it took a tentative step forward, then another, until it was close enough to touch. The moment her skin made contact with the hatchling's scales, Sarah felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. The baby dragon made a soft trilling sound and pressed against her palm, seeking warmth and comfort. The mother's been dead for at least a week, Sarah realized, looking at the advanced state of decay. This little one has been here alone, probably starving, trying to wake up someone who will never wake up again. She carefully scooped the hatchling up, surprised by how light it was. The creature immediately curled against her chest, its tiny claws gripping her uniform as it sought security. "Chen, put that thing down," Crix ordered. "We have a job to do, and harboring a live dragon violates about 17 different galactic treaties." "Then we don't report it," Sarah said firmly. "We finish the salvage operation, and I take responsibility for the hatchling." The team exchanged glances, clearly unhappy with her decision but unwilling to directly challenge a human's judgment. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy for being unpredictable, stubborn, and surprisingly effective when they set their minds to something. As the other team members began their grisly work of harvesting materials from the dragon's corpse, Sarah walked back toward the shuttle, the hatchling secure in her arms. She could feel its tiny heart beating rapidly against her chest, and she made a silent promise to the dead mother whose protective claws still curved around empty space. Whatever the galaxy thought dragons were supposed to be, this little one would have a chance to be something different, something better. She just had to keep it alive long enough to find out what that might be. Dr. Elena Vasquez nearly dropped her coffee when Sarah walked into her laboratory, carrying what was unmistakably a dragon hatchling. The xenobiologist had spent her entire career studying extinct species, but she had never expected to see a living specimen of the galaxy's most feared predator. "Dear God, Sarah, what have you done?" Elena whispered, her hands shaking as she set down her mug. "I need your help," Sarah said directly. "It's starving and I don't know what to feed it." Elena's training warred with her instincts. As a scientist, she was fascinated by the opportunity to study a living dragon. As a rational being, she knew that harboring one was essentially signing her own death warrant if the Galactic Council discovered it. Echo lifted its head from Sarah's jacket and looked at Elena with those impossibly intelligent purple eyes. The hatchling made a soft, questioning sound, and Elena felt her scientific objectivity crumble. "Let me scan it," she said, reaching for her bioanalyzer. "I need to understand its current health status." The readings were worse than Sarah had feared. Echo was severely malnourished, and its energy levels were dangerously low. According to the scanner, the hatchling's biological systems were beginning to shut down. "It's dying," Elena said bluntly. "Maybe 2 days left, possibly less." "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said desperately. Elena pulled up every file she had on dragon biology, scrolling through centuries of research and speculation. Most of it was incomplete or based on examination of dead specimens. But there were fragments of information about dragon physiology that might help. "Here," she said, pointing to a passage in an ancient text. "Dragon hatchlings require a form of energy that the old texts call life essence. It's not just nutrition, it's some kind of emotional or psychic connection." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "According to this, young dragons bond with their mothers not just physically but emotionally and mentally. They literally feed off the maternal connection. Without it," Elena trailed off, unwilling to state the obvious conclusion. Sarah looked down at Echo, who was now breathing in shallow, rapid pants. The hatchling's scales had turned a dull gray color, and it seemed to be struggling to keep its eyes open. "Then I'll be its mother," Sarah said firmly. "Sarah, you're human. You don't have the same biology." "But I have love," Sarah interrupted. "I have the desire to protect and nurture. If dragons really do feed off emotional connections, then maybe species doesn't matter as much as intent." Elena wanted to argue, but she had seen stranger things in her years of xenobiological research. Some species formed symbiotic relationships across genetic lines that seemed impossible, but somehow worked. "There's one more thing," Elena said hesitantly. "The texts mention that the bonding process is dangerous for the caregiver. It requires opening yourself completely to another consciousness, and dragons are incredibly powerful psychically, even as hatchlings." Sarah didn't hesitate. "What do I need to do?" Elena guided her to a comfortable chair and had her hold Echo against her chest, skin-to-scale contact. Then she dimmed the lights and activated several monitoring devices to track both Sarah's and Echo's vital signs. Focus on your feelings for the hatchling, Elena instructed. Think about why you saved it, why you're willing to risk everything to help it. Open your mind to the connection. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel everything she had been holding back. The protective instinct that had driven her to defy her team, the maternal love that had grown stronger each day, the fierce determination to give Echo a chance at life. At first, nothing happened. Then gradually, Sarah began to sense something else in her mind. It was small and fragile and desperately afraid. But underneath the fear was something beautiful, a consciousness that was pure and curious and desperately longing for connection. The moment Sarah opened her heart to that presence, Echo's eyes snapped open and began to glow with a soft inner light. The hatchling's scales shifted from gray to a brilliant golden color, and its breathing became stronger and more regular. But the connection went both ways. As Echo drew strength from Sarah's love and protection, Sarah found herself experiencing flashes of dragon memory and instinct. For a terrifying moment, she felt the urge to hoard and dominate, to claim territory and demand submission from lesser beings. Fight it, Elena urged, watching the monitors spike dangerously. Don't let it overwhelm your personality. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed back against the alien instincts flooding her mind. She held on to her human values: cooperation, empathy, the belief that strength should be used to protect rather than dominate. Gradually, she felt Echo's consciousness shift in response to her influence. The hatchling was learning from her just as she was connecting with it. Echo's natural dragon instincts were being tempered by Sarah's human morality, creating something entirely new. When the connection finally stabilized, both Sarah and Echo were exhausted but alive. The hatchling had grown noticeably larger and stronger, its scales now a healthy iridescent blue-green. More importantly, its eyes held a new intelligence, one that combined dragon cunning with human compassion. Remarkable, Elena breathed, studying the readings. You've created a symbiotic bond that shouldn't be possible. Echo is still fundamentally a dragon, but it's been influenced by human emotional patterns. Is it safe? Commander Thane asked from the doorway. He had been watching the entire process, ready to intervene if necessary. Sarah looked down at Echo, who nuzzled against her hand with obvious affection. Safer than any dragon in history, she said confidently, because this one knows what love feels like. Echo looked up at Commander Thane and made a soft, trilling sound that somehow conveyed both greeting and gratitude. For the first time since dragons had been discovered, one had chosen connection over conquest. The real question now was whether the rest of the galaxy would give them a chance to prove that this new kind of dragon could coexist peacefully with other species. Word of Echo's existence spread through the station faster than Sarah had hoped it would. Within hours of the bonding ceremony, she found herself facing a crowd of angry representatives from various species, all demanding that the dragon be destroyed immediately. The emergency council meeting was held in the station's main conference room, with delegates from the Zolothian Empire, the Brutanian Military Collective, the Sindarian Trade Federation, and a dozen other major powers. Sarah sat at one end of the table with Echo curled protectively in her lap, while Commander Thane and Dr. Vasquez flanked her as unofficial advocates. This is madness, declared Ambassador Crix, his forearms gesturing wildly. Humans have harbored a creature that could destroy us all. The precedent set by allowing this cannot stand. The dragon species was declared extinct and their resurrection banned by the Galactic Extinction Protocols, added Vorthak, the Brutanian representative. Harboring one is an act of biological terrorism. Sarah listened to the accusations and threats with growing frustration. Every speaker focused on what dragons had done centuries ago, but none were willing to consider what Echo might become with proper guidance. You're all talking about crimes committed by individuals who died long before Echo was born, Sarah finally said, standing up with the hatchling in her arms. You're condemning an innocent creature based on the actions of its ancestors. Dragons are not innocent, snapped Talara of the Sindarian Federation. They are genetically predisposed to dominance and aggression. It is in their very nature to conquer and destroy. So were humans once, Sarah replied calmly. We spent thousands of years fighting wars, enslaving other humans, and destroying our own planet. But we learned to be better. We chose to evolve beyond our worst instincts. Echo looked up at the assembled delegates with curious eyes, completely unaware of the death sentences being debated. The hatchling made a soft questioning sound and tilted its head at Ambassador Crix, who visibly flinched despite the dragon being no bigger than a house cat. The creature already shows signs of manipulation, Crix said nervously. Look how it tries to appear harmless and innocent. It is harmless and innocent, Dr. Vasquez interjected, activating a holographic display showing Echo's brain scans. These readings show a neural pattern unlike any dragon we've studied before. The bonding process with Captain Chen has fundamentally altered its psychological development. The display showed comparative brain scans between Echo and preserved dragon specimens. Where ancient dragons showed hyperactive aggression centers and underdeveloped empathy regions, Echo's scans revealed balanced emotional centers and enhanced cooperative instincts. Neural patterns can change, argued the Corellian delegate. What happens when it reaches maturity and its true nature asserts itself? Then we deal with that when it happens, Sarah said firmly. But we don't execute someone for crimes they might commit in the future. Commander Thane stepped forward. I've been observing the hatchling for the past 72 hours. In that time, it has shown no aggressive behaviors, no attempts at dominance or manipulation. Instead, I've seen it comfort Dr. Vasquez when she was stressed, help Sarah with simple tasks, and show genuine concern for the well-being of others. Anecdotal evidence, dismissed Vorthak. Dragons are master manipulators. Of course it would appear benevolent while it's weak and dependent. What would it take to convince you? Sarah asked desperately. What kind of proof would you need that Echo is different? The delegates exchanged glances. Finally, Ambassador Crix spoke. Demonstration. If this creature is truly as reformed as you claim, let it prove its nature under controlled conditions. What kind of demonstration? Sarah asked warily. A stress test, said the Corellian delegate. Dragons under pressure reveal their true nature. We'll create scenarios that would trigger aggressive responses in a normal dragon, and see how your pet reacts. Sarah wanted to refuse, but she could see the determination in the delegates' faces. This was Echo's only chance to prove itself, and her only chance to save its life. Fine, she agreed, but I want strict protocols. No actual danger to Echo, and I maintain the right to stop the test if it becomes harmful. The next few hours were among the most stressful of Sarah's life. The delegates had designed a series of scenarios meant to trigger dragon instincts, territorial challenges, resource competition, and threat simulations. In the first test, Echo was placed in an area with limited food and water, while holographic projections of various species appeared to compete for resources. A normal dragon would have immediately attacked the projections or tried to hoard the supplies. Instead, Echo carefully divided the food into portions and seemed confused when the holographic beings didn't eat their shares. The second test involved simulated attacks on Sarah. As holographic enemies appeared to threaten her, Echo's scales briefly flashed silver with alarm, but instead of attacking, the hatchling positioned itself between Sarah and the threats and made loud warning calls, clearly trying to alert others to help, rather than engaging in violence. The final test was the most telling. The delegates projected images of vast treasures and territory that Echo could claim as its own. The hatchling looked at the displays with mild interest, then lost attention entirely when Sarah showed it a simple origami crane she had folded from paper. Fascinating, Dr. Vasquez murmured, recording everything. It's completely disinterested in wealth or power. Its value system has been fundamentally altered by the bonding process. When the tests were complete, the conference room fell silent. Even the most vocal opponents had to admit that Echo's behavior was unlike anything they had expected from a dragon. This proves nothing, Vorthak said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. One dragon raised under artificial conditions is hardly representative of the species. No, Sarah agreed. But it proves that dragons aren't inherently evil. It proves that with the right guidance and love, even the most feared species in the galaxy can choose a different path. Echo, exhausted from the tests, had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. The hatchling's breathing was peaceful and steady, and its scales had settled into a soft, contented blue color. The question now, Commander Thane said quietly, is whether the galaxy is brave enough to give peace a chance. The Galactic Council's decision came down 3 days later through encrypted channels. Echo would be allowed to live, but under the strictest supervision ever imposed on a sentient being. Sarah would remain as its primary caregiver, but they would be relocated to a remote research facility where Echo's development could be monitored and studied. The facility was located on Cygnus Prime, a small planet on the edge of civilized space. It was officially designated as a xenobiological research station, but Sarah quickly realized it was more like a comfortable prison. The compound was surrounded by automated defense systems, and every room was monitored by sensors that tracked Echo's bioreadings and behavior patterns. Dr. Vasquez had volunteered to transfer to the facility, bringing her research equipment and a small team of xenobiologists who were interested in studying peaceful dragon development. Commander Thane also arranged to have a rotation of security personnel who were specifically chosen for their open-mindedness and lack of anti-dragon prejudice. Echo adapted to the new environment with remarkable resilience. The hatchling, now about the size of a medium dog after 2 weeks of proper nutrition and care, seemed to view the facility as an exciting playground, full of new things to explore and people to meet. "Look at this," Dr. Vasquez called to Sarah one morning, pointing to her monitoring screens. "Echo's learning rate is extraordinary. Not just language and basic concepts, but complex social dynamics and emotional recognition." Sarah watched through the observation window as Echo interacted with a young research assistant named Marcus. The dragon was carefully stacking blocks while Marcus explained the principles of structural engineering. When Marcus accidentally knocked over part of the structure, Echo immediately began rebuilding it, chirping encouragingly at the human. "It's not just intelligent," Sarah mused. "It's empathetic. It actually cares about other people's feelings." The bonding process fundamentally altered its neural development, Dr. Vasquez explained. Where a normal dragon would develop predatory instincts and territorial behaviors, Echo has developed cooperative and nurturing instincts instead. But not everyone was convinced that Echo's peaceful nature would last. The facility received regular visits from Galactic Council inspectors, military analysts, and species representatives who were looking for any sign that the dragon might revert to its true nature. The most challenging visitor was Dr. Mordai Thex, a renowned xenopsychologist who specialized in predator species behavior. Unlike the others, he didn't seem interested in proving Echo was dangerous. He genuinely wanted to understand how the bonding process had worked. "Remarkable," he said after observing Echo for several hours. "The creature shows no signs of the narcissistic personality traits that defined historical dragons. Instead, it demonstrates altruistic behaviors and genuine concern for others' welfare." "You sound surprised," Sarah said, joining him in the observation room. "I am," Dr. Thex admitted. "In all my years studying predator species, I've never seen such a complete psychological transformation." Dragons were apex narcissists. They literally could not comprehend that other beings had value beyond their usefulness. Through the window, they watched Echo playing with a group of children from the facility's family quarters. The dragon was carefully moderating its strength and size to avoid accidentally hurting the smaller humans, and when one child fell and started crying, Echo immediately nuzzled the child gently and made soft, comforting sounds. "How is it possible?" Dr. Thex asked. "Love," Sarah said simply. Echo learned what love feels like before it learned what power feels like. It understands connection before dominance. "But the genetic programming gets overridden by experience," Sarah interrupted. "Humans have genetic programming for violence and tribalism too, but we've learned to be better than our worst instincts." Echo just had the advantage of learning cooperation from birth. As the weeks passed, Echo continued to grow and develop at an astonishing rate. By the end of the first month, it was the size of a large dog, and had learned to communicate through a combination of vocalizations, body language, and simple written symbols. More importantly, it had begun to demonstrate problem-solving abilities that impressed even the most skeptical observers. The turning point came when a reactor malfunction threatened to contaminate the facility's water supply. The repair teams were struggling to reach the damaged components through a narrow maintenance tunnel that was too small for humans in radiation suits. Echo, watching the frantic activity, approached Sarah with obvious concern. Through their mental link, Sarah could sense the dragon's desire to help, and she suddenly realized that Echo was small enough to fit through the tunnel. "Absolutely not," Dr. Vasquez said when Sarah suggested it. We can't risk exposing Echo to radiation. Dragons are naturally resistant to most forms of radiation, Sarah argued. And Echo wants to help. Look at it. The dragon was standing by the tunnel entrance, clearly agitated by the danger to the facility's inhabitants. Its scales had shifted to an urgent orange color, and it kept looking back and forth between Sarah and the tunnel. If we don't fix this in the next hour, we'll have to evacuate the facility, the chief engineer reported. And even then, the contamination could spread to nearby settlements. Sarah made the decision that would define Echo's relationship with the rest of the galaxy. She knelt down and explained the situation to the dragon, using their mental link to convey the danger and the need for help. Echo didn't hesitate. The dragon immediately entered the tunnel, following Sarah's guidance to locate and repair the damaged components. Working with careful precision, Echo managed to restore the reactor's safety systems and prevent the contamination. When Echo emerged from the tunnel, tired but unharmed, it was greeted by cheers from the entire facility staff. For the first time, humans and other species were looking at a dragon not with fear or suspicion, but with gratitude and admiration. It saved us, Marcus said wonderingly. It actually risked its life to save us. News of Echo's heroic action spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Suddenly, the debate about dragon nature took on a very different tone. Here was undeniable proof that at least one dragon could choose the welfare of others over its own safety. But with recognition came new challenges. The facility began receiving requests from dozens of species who wanted to study Echo, meet Echo, or learn from Echo's example. Sarah realized that their quiet life of growth and development was about to become much more complicated. The galaxy was finally ready to listen to what Echo had to teach them about the possibility of redemption and change. The question was whether they were ready for the responsibilities that came with that knowledge. 6 months after the reactor incident, Echo had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a celebrity dragon. Delegations from across the galaxy arrived weekly to observe the facility, and Echo's daily activities were broadcast on scientific channels throughout known space. The dragon, now the size of a small horse with wings that spanned nearly 4 meters, had begun to understand its unique position in the galaxy. Through countless conversations with Sarah and the research team, Echo had learned about its species' dark history and the fear it still inspired in others. "I don't understand why they're afraid," Echo said during one of their evening talks. Its voice a melodious combination of clicks, trills, and carefully pronounced human words. The dragon's ability to learn languages was extraordinary. It could now communicate fluently in 12 different species' tongues. "Your ancestors did terrible things," Sarah explained gently. "They conquered worlds, enslaved populations, and showed no mercy to those who opposed them. People remember that." Echo's scales shifted to a deep blue color that Sarah had learned indicated sadness and confusion. "But I'm not my ancestors. I've never hurt anyone. I know that, and most people here know that too. But fear isn't always rational, especially when it's been passed down through generations." The dragon was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then its scales brightened to a determined silver color. "Then I need to show them who I really am." Sarah felt a surge of pride and concern through their mental link. Echo's desire to prove itself was admirable, but she worried about the pressure and expectations being placed on such a young creature. The opportunity for Echo to make a larger statement came sooner than expected. A distress signal reached the facility from a mining colony in the nearby Vega system. A massive asteroid had collided with one of their processing stations, trapping over 300 workers in a collapsed underground complex. Rescue ships from several species were already en route, but initial reports suggested that the situation was dire. The collapsed sections were too unstable for heavy equipment, and the trapped workers had limited air supply. "I could help," Echo said quietly, having overheard the emergency communications. "I'm small enough to fit through the debris, and I can carry emergency supplies to the trapped workers." "Absolutely not," Dr. Vasquez said immediately. "It's too dangerous, and we don't know how the other rescue teams would react to seeing a dragon." "They might panic," Sarah added, though she could feel Echo's determination through their bond. Some of those species have never seen a dragon in person. But as the hours passed and the rescue efforts stalled, it became clear that conventional methods weren't going to be sufficient. The rescue teams were making progress, but not fast enough to reach all the trapped workers before their air supply ran out. Commander Thane, who had maintained his position as the facility's security chief, made the decision that would change everything. "Echo goes," he announced during an emergency meeting, "but with full protection and support. The risk," Dr. Vasquez began. "The risk is worth it if we can save 300 lives," Thane interrupted. "And this is Echo's chance to show the galaxy what dragons can really be." The rescue mission required careful coordination. Echo would travel to the mining colony aboard a specially modified transport ship, accompanied by Sarah, a full medical team, and diplomatic representatives who could help manage any negative reactions from the other rescue teams. When they arrived at the disaster site, the reaction was immediate and intense. Several of the rescue ships immediately powered up their weapon systems, and panicked communications flooded the emergency channels. "There's a dragon on site," reported the Brutanian rescue commander. "All ships, prepare for combat." "Negative," Commander Thane responded calmly over the open channel. "The dragon is here to assist with rescue operations. Stand down weapons and maintain your positions." "You've brought a monster to a disaster site?" the Zolothian rescue coordinator demanded. "This is madness." Sarah activated the public communication system and spoke directly to all the rescue teams. "This is Captain Sarah Chen. The dragon you see is Echo, and it's here to help save lives. I'm asking you to give us a chance to prove that not all dragons are your enemies." The debate might have continued indefinitely, but Echo made the decision for everyone. Without waiting for permission, the dragon launched itself from the transport ship and flew directly toward the collapsed mining station. Panic erupted on the emergency channels as weapon systems tracked Echo's flight path. But instead of attacking or threatening anyone, Echo landed gently beside the main collapse site and began calling out in multiple languages. "Hello, my name is Echo. I'm here to help. Please don't be afraid." The rescue teams watched in stunned silence as Echo began carefully moving debris with its claws, creating pathways that were too narrow for rescue equipment, but perfect for emergency supply runs. The dragon's natural strength and ability to fly allowed it to reach areas that had been completely inaccessible to the other teams. More importantly, Echo's presence seemed to have a calming effect on the trapped workers. Instead of the panic that rescue coordinators had expected, reports from inside the collapsed areas indicated that the miners were responding positively to the dragon's help. "The big lizard is talking to us," came one transmission from deep inside the collapsed complex. "Says its name is Echo and it's brought medical supplies. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not complaining if it's here to help." Over the next 18 hours, Echo worked tirelessly alongside the rescue teams. The dragon carried emergency supplies through collapsed tunnels, helped stabilize unstable debris, and even used its fire-breathing ability to create controlled thermal updrafts that improved air circulation in the trapped areas. But it was Echo's interactions with the trapped workers that truly changed minds. The dragon spoke gently to frightened miners, comforted those who were injured, and even sang lullabies in various languages to help children stay calm while they waited for rescue. By the time the last worker was safely extracted, Echo had personally assisted in the rescue of over 200 people. The dragon was exhausted, its scales dull with fatigue, but its eyes were bright with satisfaction. The rescue commanders who had initially threatened to shoot Echo on sight now found themselves struggling to express their gratitude. The Brutanian commander, a species known for their warrior culture and hatred of dragons, approached Echo directly. "Dragon," he said formally, "you have shown honor in battle against a common enemy. My people will remember this." Echo, too tired to maintain its usual perfect diplomatic composure, simply nodded and said, "I'm glad I could help." That's what friends do. The word friends echoed across the emergency channels, broadcast to rescue ships from dozens of different species. For the first time in galactic history, a dragon had used that word to describe its relationship with other beings. As news of the rescue mission spread throughout the galaxy, the conversation about dragons began to shift fundamentally. Echo hadn't just saved lives, it had saved the possibility of a future where dragons and other species could coexist peacefully. But with that possibility came new challenges and responsibilities that neither Echo nor Sarah had fully anticipated. 1 year after the mining colony rescue, the Galactic Council faced an unprecedented decision. Representatives from over 50 species had gathered on the neutral world of Concordia to debate resolution. By 47, the official recognition of Echo as a full galactic citizen and the establishment of protocols for peaceful dragon reintegration. Sarah stood before the massive assembly hall with Echo beside her. The dragon had grown considerably over the past year and now stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, with wings that could span almost 10 meters when fully extended. Despite its impressive size, Echo moved with careful grace, constantly aware of its impact on the smaller beings around it. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. "1 year ago, many of you believed that the only good dragon was a dead dragon. Today, I stand before you with living proof that redemption and change are possible for any species, no matter how dark their history." The assembly was divided. Progressive species like the Terran Alliance and the Andromedan Collective had already voiced their support for the resolution. More conservative factions, led by the Brutanian Empire and the Corellian Republic, remained skeptical despite Echo's heroic actions. "Captain Chen speaks of redemption," declared General Vorthak, "now representing the Brutanian military interests. But how can we be certain that this single example represents a true change in dragon nature? What guarantee do we have that other dragons, if discovered, would follow Echo's example?" Echo stepped forward, its massive form drawing gasps from some of the smaller delegates. When it spoke, its voice was clear and confident, trained through months of diplomatic preparation. "Honored General, I cannot speak for dragons who do not exist or may never exist. I can only speak for myself and my choices. Every day I choose cooperation over conquest, protection over predation, and love over dominance. These choices define who I am, not the species I was born into." "Pretty words," interrupted Ambassador Crix, "but words are easily spoken. What happens when your true nature asserts itself? What happens when you decide that lesser species should serve your interests?" Echo's scales shifted to a patient blue color as it considered the question. "Honored Ambassador, may I ask about your own species' history?" Crix's forearms gestured defensively. "What does that have to do with anything? The Zolothian Empire once practiced ritual cannibalism and enslaved weaker species for entertainment," Echo said calmly, citing historical facts it had learned during its diplomatic studies. "Yet today you are respected members of this council, advocates for justice and cooperation. How did your species overcome its true nature?" The assembly fell silent. Echo had made its point with devastating effectiveness. Every species represented in the hall had dark chapters in their history, but they had all evolved beyond their worst instincts. "We learned," Crix admitted quietly. "We chose to be better." "As have I," Echo replied. "The difference is that I learned cooperation before I learned conquest. I was taught love before I was taught dominance. Perhaps that is the key, not changing what dragons are, but ensuring they learn the right lessons from the beginning." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward to present her research findings. "Honorable delegates, our studies show that dragon psychological development is incredibly malleable during the first 2 years of life. The bonding process that shaped Echo's personality can be replicated and refined." She activated a holographic display showing Echo's neural patterns compared to historical dragon specimens. "With proper guidance and emotional support, we believe that any dragon hatchling could develop the same cooperative instincts that Echo demonstrates." "And if you're wrong?" demanded the Corellian representative. "If even one dragon reverts to historical behaviors, it could devastate entire star systems." "Then we deal with that individual, just as we would with any dangerous criminal," Sarah interjected. "We don't condemn entire species based on the actions of individuals." Echo turned to address the assembly directly. "I understand your fears. I've studied the history of my kind and I know the pain and destruction they caused. But I also know that holding on to old hatreds and fears prevents us from building a better future." The dragon paused, its scales shifting to a warm golden color that conveyed sincerity and hope. "I propose something unprecedented," Echo continued. "If this council grants me citizenship, I will dedicate my life to proving that dragons can be forces for peace and protection. I will work alongside your species to explore the galaxy, to help those in need, and to demonstrate through my actions that change is possible." "And if other dragons are discovered?" asked the Andromedan delegate. "Then I will be their teacher, Echo said firmly. I will show them what I learned from humans, that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. That the greatest treasures are friendships and love, not gold and power. The debate continued for hours, with delegates arguing passionately on both sides. But gradually the testimonies began to shift in Echo's favor. Representatives spoke of the mining rescue, of Echo's gentle interactions with their children, of the dragon's consistent demonstration of empathy and cooperation. When the vote was finally called, the result was closer than expected but decisive. 63% in favor of granting Echo full galactic citizenship and establishing the dragon reintegration protocols. As the results were announced, Echo's scales blazed with brilliant rainbow colors, a display of joy and gratitude that brought tears to many eyes in the assembly. The dragon turned to Sarah and gently nuzzled her with its massive head. Thank you, Echo whispered, using their private mental link, for seeing a mother worth saving instead of a monster worth fearing. Sarah wrapped her arms around Echo's neck, feeling the strength and warmth of her adopted child. Thank you for becoming everything I hoped you could be. In the months that followed, Echo became the galaxy's first dragon ambassador, traveling between worlds to demonstrate that peaceful coexistence was possible. The dragon's example inspired new research into species rehabilitation, sparked diplomatic breakthroughs between former enemies, and gave hope to countless beings who had been judged by their species' worst representatives. But perhaps most importantly, Echo's story became proof of something that humans had long believed, but the galaxy had been reluctant to accept. That love, patience, and the willingness to see potential instead of just past mistakes could transform even the most fearsome beings into forces for good. Years later, when the first new dragon egg was discovered in the ruins of an ancient hatchery, there was no debate about what to do. The galaxy had learned from Echo's example. They found a human family willing to provide the love and guidance necessary to raise another peaceful dragon. And in the nursery, where the new hatchling took its first breaths, a holographic recording of Echo played, softly a message of welcome to its younger sibling and a promise that no dragon would ever again have to choose between love and loneliness. The age of the dragon had ended centuries ago, but the age of the dragon friend had just begun.